For Sunday, June 10th, you've found the Georgia gang. And topping our agenda today, a messy tape setup between the two top Republican candidates for governor. It's pesky plastic time again at Atlanta City Hall. And DeKalb sues the city over the school annexation. Some of the stories up for grabs on the Georgia gang.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia gang starts now.
And we're glad you could be with us on this steamy Sunday. Sitting in for Alexis today is my old friend, Kathy Woolard, the longtime president of the Atlanta City Council and one of the keenest political observers I know. Glad you're here, Kathy.
Thanks, Dick.
We're going to begin with state politics today because I would say in my 50 years of covering politics, I have never seen a situation, and I'm going to start with you, Kathy, where when candidates having the usual uncomfortable meeting over perhaps the loser endorsing the winner or the loser having campaign debts paid off, somebody taped it and released it? Really? That's what happened here. Clay Timmons leaked his tape of his conversation with Casey Cagle.
Well, you know, I'm rather surprised that Cagle was so forthcoming. I think if you're going to do something like, you know, what he did in this case, you know, you might want to keep that to yourselves as you go on down here. But I always wondered, you know, why Clay Tippins got in the race, why his uncle resigned as chair of the committee. Now now we can see why.
It's just hard for me to believe, Theron, that this is totally over one bill. A bill, by the way, that is less controversial with each cycle as we settle into these scholarships for low-income kids to go to private schools. I mean, Lindsey Tippins, I get it, he's an educator, he resigns. But why does Clay Tippins make such a deal out of this?
I don't know. And what Clay Tippins did is disgraceful. As you talked about it, I mean, for all of us who have private conversations where you go out and you seek the endorsement and support of the loser, which has happened in all the races that we have in Georgia, for him to record it and then actually leak it to the press, it's just disgraceful. Now, as far as the legislative process, I mean, if Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle did this, I mean, I'll be the first to say that there's not the first time that we've known politicians sort of influence outcomes of the elections. But to your point about the actual bill and the intent of the bill, and to do it with that particular bill is what's sort of bizarre. But no, but Clay Tippins was very wrong for this, and it's kind of looks like what's going on the Republican side right now, as we talked about doing this sort of messy primary that they got runoff that they have going on.
Phil, would you trust Clay Tippins in a business meeting?
Well, the answer is no. And I agree with Theron, and I think we would all agree that this was wrong, and that it does break down trust for when people are trying to have, as you point out, frank conversations and sincere conversations, and then something like that happens. So, and then to the political aspect here, of course, Brian Kemp is running against Casey Cagle in the Republican primary. It'll be interesting to see with the ad wars what happens, what Brian Kemp will say, what other third parties will say. A couple things that also struck me too was the $3 million that Casey Cagle was supposed to be worried about from a PAC that supports these private schools. The legislation, I guess, for viewers is about the Student Scholarship Organization, right, where you get tax credits if you donate. And I never heard of a PAC in a governor's race doing $3 million, maybe 300,000, but not $3 million. But lastly, in my political career, I've never seen a candidate like Casey Cagle. He's irritated both the public school folks and the private school folks all in one conversation.
Well, that's true, but the bill is generally supported, at least by the Republican majority, clearly.
Well, yes, and I'm actually glad that it passed. I know we'll probably disagree on that, but I think that Cagle did the right thing, even though he's saying he didn't want to do it.
Well, I'll just say this. Clay Tippins has a career in business. I think that's been damaged by this episode. I wouldn't trust him. And politically, I think Clay Tippins is done. Who on earth would form an alliance with him? And does Brian Kemp even want Clay Tippins' endorsement now?
There you go. So the Cagle campaign has got to be very careful of how they handle this, right? Because not only do you maybe turn off Clay Tippins, which I think they probably know they're never going to talk to him again, but also he had a lot of supporters. But also, how does the Kemp campaign to deal with this? And then you still got Hunter Hill supporters out there as well. And then let's not forget about Michael Williams. And so this is a very...
Well, let's forget about Michael Williams.
This is very delicate how you handle this. And I think campaigns, they got enough staff, enough experts on their staff to handle this.
In the meantime, prior to this, it looked to me as if Casey Cagle was very much on the offensive, attacking Brian Kemp over a procedural vote on a gun bill. In fact, I think trying to make Brian Kemp look anti-gun is foolish after he's spent millions becoming the gun guy, nationally known, pointing his shotgun at Jake and everything.
I think Cagle is in trouble. You know, kind of traditionally, it doesn't happen all the time, but the person who comes in first in the runoff doesn't win.
Right.
And so when you're seeing Clay Tippins do this and Hunter Hill's comments, it really shows that all of the other people have their own reasons for really not wanting Cagle to win. And I think that can accrue to the benefit of Kemp whether anybody endorses him or not.
Well, also kind of and to add to that, Casey Cagle's campaign has money, and we have
Brian
money.
Kemp's campaign have money? I'm not sure.
No, I think he's struggling. And so I think it could be a very close, as we all know here on this panel, I think most viewers know turnout is the key. Both these Republicans have to get out their base, and as you pointing out, Theron, what about the other defeated candidates? They have to be very careful in how they strategize. You're absolutely right about that. But I think the Casey Cagle campaign can come right back with some devastating ads, and I think Brian Kemp has to answer. And so, does he have the money to answer? I think that if I was with the Kemp campaign, I'd do a comparative ad. If I was with the Cagle campaign, I'd keep hammering away.
All right, let's turn to the lieutenant governor's race for a minute before we go to the Democrats. On the Republican side, David Schaefer, who's in a runoff, picked up the endorsement of Josh McCoon. I often don't think endorsements mean that much, and this one I do, because I think it reaffirms Schaefer's status with the Christian right, the religious right. That's a pretty good thing for David Schaefer. Democrats have got this time now. They're in a lull. They can do grassroots campaigning. Stacey Abrams is the nominee. But I am struck with each passing week as to how far left Stacey Abrams is taking the Georgia Democratic Party. The latest that sticks in my mind, and we've mentioned it once or twice, Kathy, she wants to take back the income tax cut, the first one in Georgia in 37 years. That's like reaching into voters' pockets and saying, I want a do-over. I want that money that's in your wallet. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm not sure that's what I'd lead with. I don't really see how that's a winning proposition to do that. Now, I think to talk about how you might want to increase funding in different ways is a better approach to that if you wanted to do it. But I want to go back, if you don't mind, on this David Schaefer-McCoon thing, because McCoon lost his race badly. Schaefer was really, quietly, behind the scenes, the person who has been pushing the RFRA bills and the bad adoption bill. I don't think this helps Schaefer one bit. And you have in Marietta, you have Sam Teasley being opposed by Mary Frances Williams, longtime lobbyist, father was mayor. I think you're going to see the people who associated themselves with these RFRA bills, and we'll talk about Masterpiece Cake, but I think you're going to start seeing people go down for those things, and that won't bode well for Casey Cagle.
But you're looking at it from a Democratic perspective, and I'm looking at it in this case from a Republican perspective. And both those guys were strong on religious freedom.
Well, and the Christian right is a very important part of the Republican coalition in this state, and they're very reliable voters, so I think it's helpful.
But those are arguments to be made in the general election. I agree with you there. Any other runoffs we haven't talked about, Phil?
Let me go down the line, and I think, Theron, there is a Democrat runoff for state school superintendent.
Thornton.
That's right. We can't forget that. But I've got a couple Republican ones very quickly. I'm looking over in Cobb County with Ginny Earhart, the wife of retiring Representative Earl Earhart, is in a primary. She should win that by against turnout. Paulette Rakestraw, the incumbent over in Paulding County, she's got a runoff there with Joseph Gullett. And then remember Donna Sheldon, the former state representative? She's locked in an interesting runoff, Republican runoff for the State House. County. Yes.
Yeah. All right, we've got to get out on that, and when we come back, it'll be a familiar theme. We'll dust off some of our old lines about the plastic mania at Atlanta City Hall. Stay with us.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Visit their website at fox5atlanta.com.
I'm thinking that Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms may want to return to the days when people paid their own expenses and got reimbursed by the city by the old-fashioned concept of submitting receipts. Instead, another mini eruption at City Hall where the chief operating officer's credit card was used to buy a $2,600 first-class airfare for the husband of the mayor to go to the Super Bowl in Minneapolis. Phil, you're licking your chops.
I know, again, the culture of corruption, and it's got to be addressed by Mayor Bottoms. It's disgraceful. Why was the Chief Operating Officer, Dan Gordon, giving out his card to a non-city employee in the first place? You don't lose control of your card. I thought that's what Mayor Bottoms said was not going to happen anymore, as has happened under previous Mayor Reed. And so there's a lot of explaining to do here.
Well, it's just, it could be a simple mistake, Theron. You know, here, I need a card. We got to get the mayor's husband to the Super Bowl. But it also looks like that sense of privilege, that sense of royalty. Okay, the mayor's husband is going to go. I don't have a problem with that. But get him a first-class ticket, even though he's not entitled to a city ticket because he's not a city employee.
Well, the first thing we got to really, tell the whole story. So when the trip commenced.
Oh, I did.
No, but there's a part of that we've left out that the mayor went to the council budget hearing and talked about. So immediately when they returned from this Super Bowl trip, which Derek Bottoms was one of 22 people who went on this trip, along with emergency responders, the fire chief, the police chief, to basically make sure that the city of Atlanta is prepared to take on a humongous task of actually hosting a Super Bowl. And when she immediately returned, she asked for the records of this trip. And within 10 to 15 days, she repaid the entire check. So for our viewers, let's let us know, unlike what we've seen in the past, the mayor herself took the immediate action to repay this trip. Now, what was interesting about this is that we don't know.
We pay his share, but
but she repaid his portion of the trip, and there was a little bit of more of taxes that were owed, and she is going to pay that and make sure it's done. But the one thing that's also we don't know, as someone who's actually worked in City Hall along with Kathy, the role of the COO and the role of Chief of Staff, they have these credit cards which are sort of there to just maintain the offices. We don't know who actually authorized the purchase, but what we do know is that there was a third party that actually books the travel for these city business trips. And so I don't want us to, brush over the fact that yes, it was
That's why I say it could have been a mistake.
It was a mistake. However, I think we've got to show the urgency of this mayor to say, I don't want any of this stuff to happen in my administration. I'm willing to pay back this charge that was put on the credit card for her husband to go and to conduct city business. And then, there's all these things, let's just get into it. It's all these conversations about the meals that were purchased. Well, if you have 7 people go to dinner at a Super Bowl, and I went to the Super Bowl in Houston when the Falcons played against the New England Patriots. 1, it's hard to get into a restaurant. 2, the restaurants really jack up the prices. But if you got 7 people actually, come in with a $600 bill, I mean, that's roughly about $85 per person. And so I think what I want to really convey to our viewers is that, yes, this was a mistake, but we got to give Mayor Bottoms a tremendous amount of credit for coming back, returning from the trip, reimbursing it, and even to this day, as we tape, is still investigating to make sure that all the fees were paid back through this third-party booker to make sure that there's no sense of people feeling like she's trying to abuse the office of the mayor and try to use city dollars to basically
Kathy,
fly her husband around.
When you were city council president, you probably had a city-issued card.
No, we did reimbursements.
Okay,
so
did the old-fashioned way, as I
did
suggested.
the old-fashioned way, yep. And
do you think this? I think the chief risk of, and Theron's explanation is good, but I think the chief risk of all this is that she becomes lumped with Kasim Reed. Well, the link is inescapable to me.
Well, I agree with Theron's assessment entirely. I think this was very early on. I bet she hadn't been in office for a minute and a half.
This was her second trip.
I don't think she'd been sworn in. I think it was during the transition.
So they just went ahead with the culture of corruption.
It was at the end of January. She had just got
listen, I'm totally prepared to be very, very hard about this issue because I think it's important, and I think it was a misstep that is an unfortunate headline for her at a time when she's trying to establish something different. But when you come into the office, you don't have a credit card on day one. That's just not possible. You don't get one until you're sworn in. And to Theron's point, it probably went through an agency and all the reporting went back to the COO. That said, after the scandal that we've had at City Hall and all the discussion about it during the campaigns, you know, she would have done well to be a little more thoughtful about it. But in this particular instance, unless we see a pattern of this, I wouldn't jump to the gun that this is.
And it was early.
Well, I would think the CLO should be reprimanded for allowing all of this. I mean, wouldn't you be watching a credit card even though a third party is doing
So
it?
Phil, right now after we tape, if you call up Patrick and say, hey Patrick, I want to fly to Oklahoma City, and can you book me a flight? And if you have a third party agencies that books flights for Insider Advantage, you have one determination to get to Oklahoma City, right? If Patrick goes through a third party entity and they use, say, his credit card or your credit card or maybe the many credit cards that you guys may have, you shouldn't be penalized for going to Oklahoma City because that's where you got to go. But I think to Kathy's point, I agree with
But
Kathy.
you're making my point too, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, but there's got to be rules in my office as to what credit card's going to be used. That's my point.
But the one thing
We
I
gotta
want us
get
to
out.
miss is that we're hosting the Super Bowl, Phil. Okay,
And that's great.
Yeah, so you got to go and see in Minneapolis what they have endured. I mean, this was a sort of comparison of notes, best practices conversation.
No, I get that.
And
We all get that.
And let me just say this also. I think that the mayor should be commended. And the difference is, Dick, between the former administration, she reimbursed it herself immediately.
We got to get out, but I do want to just add quickly on another front on that Freedom of Information investigation of City Hall. Chris Carr, the Attorney General, said the city will not be charged, which is very misleading because the individuals who are involved in that may well be charged. And when we return, we'll get to more of the local news. Stay with us.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Visit their website at fox5atlanta.com.
Don't forget us on Facebook and YouTube. Let's turn to DeKalb County for just a minute. We don't have to dwell on this, but the DeKalb County school system has sued the city of Atlanta over the annexation into the Atlanta school system of the Emory and CDC areas, claiming that DeKalb schools will lose $2 million in revenue. I think we can wait to see how that plays out in court. But on the other side, another court ruling involving the DeKalb schools, the county could be liable, the school system, for $250 million in withheld retirement funds from an annuity. And I noticed the attorney on the case is one Roy Barnes. He knows how to find those cases, doesn't he, with big dollar
He's
signs?
one of the top attorneys in the state, the former governor.
Yeah, and it's a $250 million liability. I know the DeKalb school system has a huge budget of well over $1 billion, but that's still a big hit. All of a sudden, we found out this week, and I just missed this, that the feds, Phil, have come up with transportation funds for toll lanes way north up on Georgia 400. I wasn't even aware that was in the discussion.
Well, and it's all good news because as we've been pointing out on this broadcast, you've got to work with the feds. We have obviously a congestion transportation problem. The legislature and the governor's been working on it, and we're meeting all the time with federal DOT people. So this is good news.
Oh no, I'm not saying
Yeah.
it isn't, but it's just
I'm
interesting.
not surprised
I've been
because-
concentrated on 75 and
Right.
575
Right.
and 85.
Well, of course, there's obviously growth
Now
up
we're
there
going
too.
right up the middle. Cobb County, I don't know what to make of it. Maybe you do. Maybe you folks do. You're going to close parks, really? Or is this like the old federal gambit that you threatened to stop Saturday mail delivery to protect your budget? I don't know where Cobb's going. It's a Republican government with a chairman who apparently wants a tax increase, and government agencies responding with plans to shut down certain functions. In this case, very popular parks in Cobb County, Phil.
Well, yeah, I would not be looking at parks, and I think that there is a $30 million hole in the Cobb County budget, and Mike Boyce, the chairman, is under tremendous pressure. He's not apparently for a tax increase, he is for one, and I think they still need to go look at cuts. I think Bob Ott just briefly had some good ideas, and I think there's going to be a revolution if there's a tax increase in Cobb County.
All right, now let's turn to a social issue that affects us, because Georgia is one of the very few states, well, not very few, Georgia is one of few states that doesn't have an overall anti-discrimination statute that covers LBGTQ, TRUVST, whatever the whole alphabet is these days. But the Supreme Court actually just punted away on a case that I know, Kathy, you'd been watching, the Master Peak wedding cake case where someone wouldn't sell a cake to someone for a gay wedding. Does that affect us here immediately, or there doesn't seem to be an appetite for a statute in the General Assembly?
Well, we'll see. Let me be clear. We don't have any. We're one of 3 states that don't have any civil rights legislation for anybody.
Right.
Okay, so you got federal bills, but you don't have any state. So that's an important distinction. And so what that means is we don't protect anyone on the basis of religion or sexual orientation, just for example. And the resolution to this RFRA issue is that we put together that with civil rights protections, and then you have the distinction. Then you start to carve out, where one's rights are protected and where one's assertions are interfering with someone else's ability to live freely in this state. And that's the place where I think we are. I think it's going to become a campaign issue. I mentioned earlier Josh McCoon lost his election. I think it's in no small part because people don't appreciate that we've devoted 5 years now to this discussion without coming up with a solution, and that is the solution. In the states that have RFRAs, for the most part, they have civil rights legislation that says your religious rights end where my freedom to live begins.
Isn't Colorado one of those states? And you just had a head-on collision.
Well, see, the Masterpiece case decision was that the commission that investigated it exhibited discrimination, not that the cake baker was correct.
Well,
so if it comes back around in a different circumstance, I think we're going to see a different
You're right
outcome.
about the Colorado Commission, and they were very hateful toward this Christian baker. And this is what bothers a lot of folks in Georgia and everywhere else, is the hateful attitude by, not all, there's a lot of sincere liberals, and I get we're all for equal rights, but the hard left is very hateful, and there's an anti-Christian thrust in all of this. And I think that's where I was glad to see that decision, where you cannot force anyone to do something they don't want to do. So I'm glad the Supreme Court.
That was not the decision. The decision was.
It said that you shouldn't force him to do something against his religious beliefs.
Yeah, that wasn't what the decision was.
Yeah, it was, and it was a narrow decision, and I'm glad it happened.
Yeah.
I'm kind of with you. I don't think that. Well, that's nuances.
Read the Wall Street Journal lead editorial. It was a great explanation as to what exactly happened in this narrow ruling.
All right. When we come back, we will shoot the wounded, as they say. We'll do winners and losers. Right back.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
And we'll begin that with you, Theron. How about it?
A few winners, and so I want to start with the Fulton County Commission. They voted this week to basically to decriminalize marijuana in unincorporated areas of Fulton County. So 4 commissioners, Rob Pitts, Natalie Hall, Bob Ellis, and Marvin Arrington voted for that. So I think that's definitely a right step in the right direction. I also want to recognize 3 appointments that Mayor Bottoms, as we take, have announced. So she's recently announced that Roosevelt Council is going to be the new CFO for the city of Atlanta. She also has made Randall Slaughter, who's been serving in the interim role as fire chief, who's a longtime Atlanta resident, who's going to be the permanent chief of fire. And also Marion Woods is going to be the new HR commissioner. And then my loser is going to be a young lady named Triana James. We talked about her a little bit during the lieutenant governor's race. She's still trying to litigate this defeat that she had against Sarah Miko, and I would just encourage her to just move on. She's lost, and let's unite as Democrats.
Wait a minute. Roosevelt Council, the interim airport director, is going to become the city CFO.
Yes, sir. And then the mayor's going to appoint an interim general manager at the airport. So I'm sure Phil will make his calls after the show and find out who that person is.
All right. Kathy, what do you have?
Well, for winners, I've got Senator Steve Hinson. He survived a
111
recount, 111 votes, and you know, from the secondary winner is DeKalb County's voting office, because they counted exactly what they counted the first time around. So at least they got that. I don't think at least they got that right. Also, the Washington Capitals won the Stanley Cup last night.
You a hockey fan?
I'm not a hockey fan, but I think it's pretty cool because usually the Canadians win, and this time we got one.
Our Canadians, in this case.
Yeah.
All right. Phil.
Well, you know, my winner, Dick, I think we would agree on this, is Maria Karstarf, and maybe we all would agree on that with the Atlanta Public Schools superintendent. Her contract was extended by the Atlanta board, and I appreciate the fact that she's been bold in closing some schools that needed to be closed, and she is a proponent of some limited school choice. My loser, I have to say, was she actually was a winner, but it was a county commissioner over in Athens, Clark County, your old turf, Mariah Parker, and this was a bit much, I would hope, even for you. She gave the communist clenched closed fist salute, and she refused to have a Bible or the Constitution when she took her oath of office. It was the autobiography of the radical Malcolm X. Is this the new face of the Democratic Party? Anyhow, I got another loser, and that is the swimsuit portion of the Miss America contest. You know, this is a harmless pleasure to have that, but then you've got the national Democrats making a porn star, Stormy Daniels, as the great empowerment of woman, but we can't have swimsuits. I don't get that.
A harmless pleasure. Oh my goodness, how many minutes do we have?
Well, you know, even Miss Georgia says that swimsuit portion helped her become a better contestant.
Wow, Phil. Okay.
I really don't know what to think about that, honestly.
Me either.
I think it was
Keep
built
the
around a
swimsuit.
swimsuit competition. That's what it was.
And I think you know, if you think about when it started as a swimsuit competition, that's all people really thought women could bring to a competition. And now times have changed, and we realize that's a silly part of this. We
Phil is fighting for it right
All right,
now.
let me-
Well, I'm glad he is. You know, glad he's got something.
Let me do my winners real quickly. Robbins Air Force Base in the state of Georgia gets the new Air Force Advanced Battle Management System. It's a big deal for Robbins and for jobs there and the state budget. And this Dr. Wendell Boutte, the dancing doctor, the plastic surgeon, made a fool of on just about every network television broadcast there is. She's been suspended for 14 days. It's a terrible thing. And we'll see you next week on the Georgia Gang.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.